All right, I'm just going to get started with the few announcements that I would like to make before our presenters get started today. So the first thing that for those of you who may not be familiar with Circle, Circle is located at the University of Arizona. We are housed in the College of Humanities, and we are one of 16 language resource centers here in the United States. Our mission is to research the teaching and learning of languages, cultural awareness and literacy in second and other languages. We also provide educators with quality teaching materials and professional development opportunities like the one today. And if you'd like to know more about us, please visit the links at the bottom of this slide. So today is the second webinar, which is part of this series that we're hosting this summer on digital multimodal composition. The first webinar, the recording of the first webinar is now available, and if you go to the QR code or visit the URL, you'll have access to it. And our last webinar in this series will take place on September 6th, and we'll focus on real-world tasks to develop digital citizenship and literacy in language learning. So now I would like to introduce our two presenters, Idoia Elola and Anna Oskoz. First of all, I would like to thank them for having accepted our invitation. Both of them are traveling, so it's been, for them, the logistics might be a little different, but I'd like to introduce them now. So Idoia Elola is a professor of Spanish and applied linguistics in the Department of Classical and Modern Languages and Literatures at Texas Tech University. She's the Spanish academic director of the Seville Study Abroad program and interim director of the Spanish Heritage Language Program. Since 2020, she is the editor-in-chief of System and oversees the selection and publication of cutting-edge research in the field of the application of educational technology and applied linguistics to problems of foreign language teaching and learning. Her research focuses primarily on digital second language writing, such as collaborative and individual writing using social tools, digital literacies, and the use of multimodal text from cognitive and sociocultural perspective. Anna Oskoz is professor of Spanish and second language acquisition at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, where she's currently associate dean in the College of Arts, Humanities, and Social Sciences. Dr. Oskoz's research focuses on the use of technology for second language learning and second language acquisition. And in her research, she has examined the use of synchronous and asynchronous communication tools, such as online chat, for second language development and discussion boards, blogs, and wikis to promote cultural discussions and enhance second language writing. She's also co-editor of the Calico Journal, which is published by Equinox. Again, thank you so much for being here with us. The floor is yours, and you can go ahead and kick me out.
Hello, everyone. We're excited to be here. We are my colleague, Idoia Elola from Texas Tech University, and I am Anna Oskoz from the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. And we're super excited of being with you here talking about how we are reassessing feedback on heritage and second digital writing. And in particular, we are going to focus on multimodal writing. We are also excited to see, as I said before, that we have participants all over the world. We are also in different places. One of them is in Spain, the other one is in Turkey. And this is to say that sometimes when we were practicing the slides, we're not going as fluid as we were planning to. So if you see 1 or 2 or 3 second delay, you know why. So, but now we're going to start.
All right, so the talk is going to be divided in 2 parts. The first part is going to be about the feedback in the heritage language and second language classroom. So we will talk a little bit about the focus, what we focus on when we write. And this will be like the most interactive section because we'll ask you some questions through Menti. And then the second is what has changed in the world, in the classroom that is make us think again about how we provide feedback. And so we would look a little bit at understanding multiliteracies, social semiotics, feedback modes and tools, assessment guidelines for feedback. All right. So a few years ago, it would have been unimaginable to give and receive feedback using emoticons. But look at us now. We're using them constantly, different colors, just to say that we like or we dislike a comment that either a friend or a family member has sent to us. But the thing is that we're also using them in the classroom, in the language classroom. Maybe the difference is that when we use them in the classroom, we might be paying more attention to the content of the text or the essay or anything that is written coming to us. And maybe we're not putting so much attention with the linguistic side of it. But we were wondering, Anna and I were wondering about what do you focus on when you are providing feedback to L2 and heritage language writing texts. So if you wouldn't mind using Menti to let us know where you are focusing on when you provide feedback on the student's text, we will really appreciate it. Content, grammar, meaning, syntax,
Register.
content and language. Register. That's fantastic, especially for heritage language learners. They are very into that.
Text structure. Spelling.
Style and agreement. Content. Grammar, content are winning here.
Yep, big time. Communication, meaning, coherence, pretty good.
Student voices, thank you for that. Mechanics.
We have some
Communication.
people on the chat, vocabulary, communication.
All right. So still content and grammar are winning.
Yeah, but coherence is pretty close.
Yeah. Sentence structure, subject, verb, and agreement. Creativity, that's fantastic too. Meaning.
Vocabulary is also very strong.
Coherence, I think is in the chat. Syntax.
Syntax.
Oh, this is a beautiful word cloud.
Yes.
All right, so you will
Subject,
continue.
verb, agreement.
I was going to say that you will continue seeing this on your, but I'm going to be moving to the next. Let me see if I do this right. We share. All right. And Anna.
So traditionally, and also as we have seen in some of your answers, the focus of feedback has been on linguistic issues. And here we are talking about grammar, vocabulary. We have also focused on content and also in general focusing on structure and organization. So when we look at research on feedback in the heritage and second language context, we see that this research has focused on the relation of feedback to the students' revision success or lack thereof. Sometimes students don't do anything with the feedback. On traditional views of feedback types and mode, and on the impact of digital text and genres. However, often instructors, or we, because we are instructors too, we often focus only on language development rather than on all the components of a multimodal text. And we don't always take into consideration all the tools that we have at our hand and that we are using in our classes for second language and heritage language writing. And this is another question for you. And this is important to talk about the type of tools that we use in the classroom is important because it's going to affect the type of feedback that we are providing to the students. So what we want to know from you is what type of tools you use in your writing classroom. And by tools, we mean blogs, it can be digital story software, it can be Google Docs, it can be pen and paper, it can be anything that you are using in the language classroom for writing. And we are asking this question, as I said before, because the tool that we use will have an impact on the type of writing that our students will produce, and also on the type of feedback that we will provide them.
Padlet, Word doc, whiteboard,
Adobe
Google
Spark.
Docs.
Wow.
Mhm.
Online
Online
forms.
form.
Pen and paper. We continue with that. I
We
like
have a great pool of audience here.
Yes.
Harmonize, Blackboard,
Word
Word
doc,
doc,
paper.
paper, important, because not everybody has access to technology, obviously. Screencast, digital notes. Very nice. I wonder if we see all of that. We have some in the chat as well. Quizlet.
So we have many people using Google Doc, a few using Padlet. All
I don't know
right,
if
so
we
we see that all over the place, many tools.
Yeah. All right. So let's see what else we are using. So if we think about this, back in the day, when we used to ask our students to complete a writing task, we used to do that on piece of paper. There was no question about it. Now we might be having questions about using paper for other reasons, but we'll talk about that. But in the last decades, we have added tools such as blogs, Facebook, X, Instagram, infographics, and all of those tools have, in a way, changed the way we vision writing. So we've gone from the term of writing to composing, because we're adding elements that are not linguistic, that are also important to create that single meaning. So there is no question that the type of writing that takes place using those tools differs because of the characteristics of the tool in terms of how we write. For example, when we develop a podcast, that has a strong written component, because if we think about it, we are writing on the script that we're going to be using in the podcast. But also, we are paying attention to the intonation or the pauses or the music that we are including during the podcast. So in a way, we're creating this message using all these different modes. However, one thing that we have to remember, and it happens to all of us, is that sometimes we use the same term to define a tool and a genre. So for example, when we talk about blogs, sometimes we talk about the tool and sometimes we're talking about the genre. Instead of maybe saying the blog software or a blogger and the genre being blogging. The same can be said with, for example, digital stories, that are these short videos that go from 2 to 5 minutes. And sometimes we use digital story for the tool instead of saying digital story software. And then instead of saying digital storytelling as the genre. So these are things that we need to think about, because in many cases we are working with text that integrate music, text, and images, and those are supposed to be multimodal texts. And Anna is going to explain more about multimodal text in a second. But I think it's important that we think about these issues. So the question that Anna and I we have is, since we've already know what you focus on the feedback, more or less the tools that they're using, we also want to know what are the genres that you are using in your classes. And they can go from narration or narrative essays to blogs or whatever it is. But this is our next question in Menti. We would like to know what you are using in your classrooms as genres.
Video, reflections.
Academic essays, summaries, portfolios, scripts, analysis papers, good.
Narrative essays, resumes, blogs, infographics. We are going to talk about that a little bit. Composition CV. Short stories.
Posts. Adobe Spark for web pages. That's very useful. Infographics again. It's perfect that Professor Mimi Lee was giving the first talk since she works with infographics for some time. Stories,
Brochures.
narrative videos, persuasive essay, stories. Well, there is a variety of genres here, which speaks well of all of us as instructors.
PowerPoint presentations, skits,
Poetry,
pictures.
fantastic. All right, so we have a better sense of the genres. So we're going to continue. Let me see if I'm doing this right.
So what we have discussed up to now are the factors that influence the way we provide feedback in multimodal tasks. We are looking at the tools that we use. We are using at the type of task or genre that we would be elaborating in the heritage or second language classroom. We are looking at the semiotic resources, for example, images, music, text, that we employ when we compose a multimodal text. And something that we have not talked about yet are the theoretical and pedagogical frameworks that are informing our work. All those factors are affecting the way that we provide feedback to our students. So every time that we have a multimodal text in front of us, we need to think, what are the factors that are influencing the way we provide the feedback in this multimodal text that is different from what we did in the past? And also we need to think what is changing in our mind and what has changed in us through the history of providing feedback, that we are providing feedback in a different way. So in order to answer these questions, we need to revise our understanding of literacy or multiliteracies, as it is this understanding that directs the feedback that we give to our heritage and second language learners. Traditionally, literacy and literacy learning had been defined as the acquisition of the coding and encoding skills that are necessary to read and write using a foreign alphabet or writing system in the context of unchanged, rule-covered, monomodal, and static linguistic elements. However, rather than thinking about literacy, it's better to talk about multiliteracies, which is a term that already comes from 1996 from the New London Group, which includes the evolution of technological tools, and we know that technological tools are changing all the time, and the diverse social, historical, and cultural contexts, and the multiple literacies, and here we talk about writing literacy, visual literacy, technological literacy, etc., that are used to communicate within diverse cultural and social settings, as well as multiple modes of delivery. And when we look at our learners, there is not question that our learners today engage in a variety of multimodal texts outside of the classroom, but as we have seen by the answers that you have given us before, inside of the heritage and the second language classroom. And the question that we ask ourselves as instructors is, what modality do we have in front of us, and how do we engage with this multimodal text? And very important, how are we going to provide feedback to the multimodal text that our students are producing in the classrooms? So in this view of multiliteracies, learners are placed at the core of the learning process, and we encourage them to accept a critical agency role in their own learning. And the objective that we have is to create a kind of a person who is an active designer of meaning, a person who is open to differences, open to problem solving and to change and to innovation. And as a learner, they have to consider the different meanings and purposes of the text, and also understand that those meanings and purposes are influenced and transformed, both of them, both by the person who is designing the text, the designer, but also by the audience who is receiving the text. From this perspective, digital feedback underscores the importance of meaning-making process associated with writing and the learner as an agent in the process. And as we are talking about multimodality and multimodal text, we need to have a clear understanding of mode and multimodality. And we refer to the work of Bouchon and Cohen in 2016, which provides what we think are very good definitions. Mode is the semiotic representation, and it can be textual, oral, visual, used to present information. And multimodality is when we combine all those modes to create meaning. For example, in a digital story, we have visuals, we have text, we have sound. In a blog, we have text and visual combined. In infographic, also visuals and text. So in this vision of multiliteracies, so what is happening now in this vision of multiliteracies is that our students are creating multimodal text that consist of visual and oral modes that not only complement each other, but work together with written and oral text. And we need to ask ourselves, what type of feedback should we provide our learners when we have texts like these ones that have so much, that have text, but they have so many images? How do we provide feedback on modes? For example, the visual or the oral that have traditionally not been considered part of the act of writing. These digital genres have become so prominent in the last decades that have changed our perceptions of communication, as well as the semiotic resources that we employ for communication. Previously, the written text was the key for communication, and we need to remember that today, this is accompanied by either static or dynamic images, sound, and features such as hashtags that help us connect ourselves to a larger audience in a way that was unthinkable a few years ago. Now, what is really important here is that language structures we are embracing in multimodal composing, and this is a balancing act for us. On one hand, we are moving from multimodal composing towards the development of a multimodal communicative competence in which we need to be aware of both the linguistic and the non-linguistic modes. However, as language structures, we are interested in language development, and this is very important for us. And we cannot overlook the importance of the development of the language. So going back to the idea of feedback, the question that we need to ask ourselves is, how do we provide feedback to our students' multimodal text and focus both in linguistic and non-linguistic aspects? Another element that we need to take into account are the type of multimodal text that we have, because not all multimodal texts are equal. And we can distinguish between strong versions and weak versions of multimodal text. Strong versions are those in which linguistic and non-linguistic modes contribute in the same manner to the communication. And this is the case of digital stories or infographics. For example, in infographic, we need both the text and the images to convey the meaning. Weak versions, however, those will be the Wikipedia entry or many blog posts. In those cases, the images have a supporting role for language development. What we need to think is what type of feedback we are going to provide that takes into account the weight of the linguistic and the non-linguistic components in those texts. Not just because we have an image, it doesn't mean we need to provide a lot of feedback in the image if it's not as relevant. So we need to be aware of the weight of all the different semiotic resources as we are providing feedback in multimodal text.
All right, so since we've provided one of the factors that was the looking at multiliteracies and understanding multiliteracies, and before we go to the next framework, are there any questions from the audience so far? And we can use the chat for this.
Okay, we can use the Q&A, but right now,
Okay.
nothing in the Q&A yet.
Not yet, okay.
Okay.
All right, we're giving one more second. Nobody?
Well, there's one question that was posted in the chat that I can see. Somebody is asking, is there any way to train students in doing a strong version?
I think that rather than thinking of training students, it's going to depend on the purpose of the communication. So what you really want, so for example, if you are working on a digital story, which would be a strong version of multimodal text, there are guidelines, and we are going to see some of those guidelines later on, that you can provide the students so they focus on all the different components, on all the different semiotic resources to create a strong multimodal text. But there are some other times in which we want a weak version of multimodal text because that's the communicative purpose. And that's what we need to keep in mind, that the communicative purpose should be guiding what we are doing in the classroom and what we are asking our students to do too.
I also
Idoia,
would like
do you want to say something?
Yeah, I would like to add that in some cases what we've done especially when we're looking or using some new tool or genre that we're using, what we've done is show examples of good and bad. So for example, fantastic digital stories and terrible digital stories. So we analyze why do they feel that one is working and the other isn't working. And then we usually take some time of the class to train and show them how to use the tools in case that there is some student that is not technologically savvy, which happens occasionally. And so there is this idea of reflection of what is good or not, showing them how to use the tools in class for a short period, maybe working with others so they get used to it. So many times we try these tools in collaboration and they do it individually. So those are like steps that you can take. And normally Anna and I, we take, usually it's like a task-based approach that we go little by little. So we're moving forward with the task. So we give them time to reflect and move on, reflect and move on. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Yeah, and I think the person who actually asked that question was also thinking about the training of language teachers for the with respect to implementing these kinds of genres in the classroom. So I guess, we could say this webinar is one way of providing some training, but in your experience, maybe in graduate or undergraduate courses focusing on education, what are some of the things you've done to help teachers maybe develop the understandings needed to work with these genres in classes, in the classroom?
Well, I think that this is a little bit what I was saying. I was teaching a methods class to my graduate students, and they come from all over the world. So each person brings different ideas and practices and experiences. So normally what we've done is, especially with technology, when we're trying to teach them, is first to give them examples. I mean, and then create some task in which they have to create. My students created, for example, infographics that they could use if they were able to give a talk to other teachers of how to use, or there could be technology for grammar or technology for vocabulary. And they have these infographics that they were very short, but very clear. And so they were feeling what it means to start an infograph from the beginning, the same feeling that the students are going to have. So if you're going to teach something, you have to try it first. I mean, that's how I see it. But I do a lot of collaborative work, especially with graduate students being trained to be teachers or use those tools in the classroom, because once they use them, they know how to teach them better. But a lot of collaborative work, because that's how they help each other. Sometimes some people are better for technology than others. And so they kind of help each other a little bit. And so then we share it with them. And then I always ask them to try them in their classes, the classes that they were teaching. And they could be from French, Japanese, Korean, Spanish, and so on.
Yeah, there's more. Thank you. There's more of a comment, I think, in the Q&A with respect to you talking about blogs as weak version of multimodal text. But somebody says, well, would vlogs be considered strong version of blogs, right?
Well, I was very careful to say many blogs, because some blogs are very strong because they have a very strong visuals that support the text. text. So again, I'm going to go back to the communicative purpose and how in this case, the text and the images are supporting each other. There are some blogs about cooking, for example, that have a lot of images. They had videos too. And I would consider those stronger than many other blogs that I have worked on, in which the visual was just had a supporting role. So there are some blogs and vlogs that can be strong multimodal text. Yes, that was a very good comment.
But I also think that the strong comes from the need for the text and the images. If they're just replicating the message or they are not adding too much, they're not integrated with each other, then that's I think what we mean by weaker.
We'll do 2 more questions and then we can't move on. Somebody is asking, is there a specific genre that you would recommend for elementary language courses? So thinking at 101 or 102 at the college level, or even for younger students in the K-12 context?
So I have to say, I have used digital storytelling with my 101 Spanish class. And I combined that with, it was a writing activity that the students were doing collaboratively, and they were using a wiki, and so every day we were in class, and after the class, they have to complete some work in the wiki. And there were questions like, what do you do this morning? And they have to use all the reflexive verbs. And what do you like to eat? And they were talking about all the food. The purpose of the activity, of the writing activity at the end, was that they had to look for a roommate. So everything that they did in the writing activity was related to how to write the letter for the roommate. And then they were in groups of 3. They had to create a digital story. And to do that, they were using the text that they had been working on for a long time for the semester, and then they added the images. And it was a task-based approach. Slowly but steady, we were adding more information, and the purpose was the finding a roommate. So it can be done at the 101 level.
I would say also infographics are easy to manage. They have a lot of templates in Canva. And so they are able to do with little vocabulary, they work very well, especially for any cultural component or linguistic component. I mean, any topics that you want to work with, those work well as well. And even blogs, we've used blogs as well for that. But in some cases, we've allowed, and we will talk about that a little bit later, the use of both languages in case they want to talk about things that they cannot communicate in their second language.
Thank you. I think there's 2 more questions, but we're going to leave that for a little bit later on and allow you to continue with your presentation.
Okay. All right, sounds good. Let me see if I can go here. All right. All right, so now we're coming to the second framework, the one that we want to be, let me see if something is stopped. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit more about social semiotics. And for social semiotics, this is going to help us again to inform our feedback decisions with multimodal text. In social semiotic theory, for instance, that help us explain the affordances of different modes, either visual, textual, or oral, and how these modes separately or collectively contribute to multimodal ensembles, such as digital stories or an infographic. Social semiotics investigates how, I would say that our students, or in this case, the writers, design and redesign their text by arranging available meaning-making resources into a multimodal whole, making authorial decisions appropriately for specific audiences and purposes. We also have to discuss that in multimodal text, these texts are referred as multimodal ensembles. And that means that they orchestrate intentionally using different modes to achieve the desired effects by the authors. So this is cognitively thought out and trying to create these multimodal ensembles. The students, in this case, we kind of see them as designers, become active producers who arrange and rearrange the components of a message by using and merging, I would say, semiotic resources in line with the intended meaning. So the merging or the integration of these modes, either images, sounds, or text, is called synesthetic semiosis, or what we will also say multimodal creation, and within which writers understand not only the role played by the mode of representation as design element, but also the effects of both the absence and the existence of design elements on reader responses to multimodal text. So sometimes when we see these compositions of multimodal text, sometimes the lack of some resources also provides some meaning. So these are things that we also need to consider. The synesthetic semiosis transpires in two forms. So one is called transformation, and that means the action that rearrange and transpose semiotic resources within a particular mode, and transduction, which restructures semiotic resources across modes. And you might be thinking, what are we talking about here? So I'll give you some examples. For example, when we talk about transformation, and we imagine that we're going to create a digital story, and we have asked the students to write a narrative essay about an experience, for example. And then we want to use that narrative essay into a digital story. What we're asking our students is to write a script, because it's a shorter video. We only have 2 minutes to 5 minutes. And so we're asking to go from a narrative written text to a script written text. So that would be transformation, just moving within one mode. Whereas when we talk about transduction, imagine again, we have that narrative essay and we're moving some of that information into oral images, or even using sound to substitute some of the information that we had in the narrative. That in that particular case, we're moving across modes. So neither transformation or transduction are easy for our students or for our instructors. So one thing that we need to do is to become fully aware of the particular affordances of every available digital tool and mode. We need to have that very clear when we're working on this type of text. From this perspective, feedback primarily emphasizes the content created within each mode, but it's also important to consider the interconnectivity between and across modes. So I'm going to give you an example of a student. She wrote about her family. This is a Spanish heritage language student, and she realizes, or she was learning, the fear that her family have faced daily because they were coming as illegal immigrants. And so she noticed how her father's uniform changed depending on the season. So sometimes it was blue, sometimes it was this tight T-shirt that was smelly because he has been sweating, because that was part of his job. So depending on the season, there was this change of clothing. So when we asked them about how to, or when they were provided with some feedback, there were two types. One was linguistic, excellent use of the present imperfect, which is very hard for our students in Spanish to talk about the past, or a positive comment. I love how you have written this paragraph. You have conveyed your emotions very well by using words like sudoroso, sweaty, and apestoso, smelly, or aferraba su vientre, very close, very tight on his belly. But we're also using this time to talk about what's coming next, because they're going to write a digital story. So since the script of the digital story is shorter, how can you convey the same meaning also using images and or sounds? And so remember, this particular text is 53 words, and it changes into 14 words. There was a reduction of 73.6 from the narrative essay to the written script. That's transformation. We're still moving within the same mode. Whereas this student was able to reduce that because she started using images of the 4 seasons with different colors, different uniforms. So she didn't have to have all that description. So that is a good example of what we would call transduction. This is another example that we also wanted to share with you. When we look at semiotic resources and the role of synesthesia of this multimodal ensemble, research has examined the essential role of multimodality in shaping a learner's authorial voice and identity. When a student is trying to find his or her voice, and is the case of, as is going to be the case of this slide, their identity, the feedback we provide can help them reflect on whether the choice of semiotic resource is appropriate. So here you can see that the feedback question, whether the photo achieves what the learner intended, was a question that we wanted to ask to see if she felt that the image was helpful in her digital story. And this is a study abroad, a student in Spain that went to Iceland. So this was her reflection. As you can see, one part of the story talks about me going to Iceland. I talk about how this is the first time that I made all the decisions on my own. The picture that I'm choosing to put is of me alone at the black sand beach. I think that will signify that I'm independent and able to decide what I want to do. So this is a different way of thinking of feedback, because sometimes we're going to be dealing with other aspects that are also important to the students, as in the case of identity in this one. In the next slide, you can see that this is an example from a Spanish heritage language student who is thinking about translingual use, going, as you can see, Spanish and English. For this assignment, he had written a poem, and he decided to write in both languages to reflect both identities. The picture also questioned whether someone with blue eyes and dark skin can be Hispanic or not. So these are some of the questions that we were using. How does the use of the two languages define your identity? How do the image and text come together to express your meaning? So another goal of the multimodal or the multimodality in the classroom is to provide a space for learners' authorial voices and identities. And so the instructor feedback can help learners find their voice and express that identity by asking them to reflect on their choices. Or, for example, the images, the language, and the color.
So although a more traditional approach would generally look at grammar, vocabulary, content, and jargon conventions, multimodality provides an opportunity to look at all the semiotic resources that are integrated to create meaning. The use of new technologies for providing feedback, which also offers options for other language choices and expression of writers' identity and voice, and the emergence of digital genres are forcing us to redefine our approaches to feedback. As instructors become, I'm going to say as we, because we are still instructors, we become at ease with newer technology tools, we begin to understand the impact that both linguistic and non-linguistic elements have on the second and the heritage language composition processes. And therefore, we are moving away from comments targeted at the more traditional genres, such as the argumentative and expository essay. We are beginning to understand that feedback is aligned with semiotic resources or multimedia to comment, for example, on the development of the digital story. We might provide feedback on whether the chosen images correspond to the topic of the story, whether there are too many literal or rather than implicit images. It's good to combine both of them. If the sound and music enhances or obstructs the story, if the music volume overpowers the voice of the narrator, and other aspects related to the digital multimodal text.
All right, so we have another question for you. We have seen the creation of multimodal text in the classroom, how they combine semiotic resources, and what we would like to know is what are the challenges and benefits of using feedback on linguistic and non-linguistic components. If you have any experiences on any of this, and if you haven't, it can be just on the linguistic, if you have not been addressing other non-linguistic issues. Oh, great. So a benefit would be to prepare learners to real life writing, composing, something that they can find later on in their future professional lives. as well as the
Mhm.
personal. Mhm. Challenge, how much feedback to offer. That's a good one.
You are correct. It's so difficult to provide what's the right amount of feedback when you have so many components. Too much time for the teacher.
Teacher.
Balancing feedback to make it positive, encouraging, and productive in terms of language learning.
Mhm.
I'm going to look in the chat. Non-linguistic might be a bit time consuming if there are deadlines.
Mhm.
To validate, the benefit is to validate learners' creativity.
Active participants in the feedback process, which is really good and something that we need to consider, especially when we have so many components to help them work collaboratively. Time consuming.
A challenge is to get the students read the feedback, read in capital letters.
Exactly. I'm sure many of us have seen providing feedback, and then I still remember one putting it in their backpack without looking at it. Focus on the whole communicative message rather than one modality, and this is what the target is. That's the goal of using this, which is something that they're using a lot in their personal lives. But how can we make them experts to be able to use that more professionally in a second language? Yeah, it is a challenge to understand both linguistic and non-linguistic components equally. What do you recommend for creating the rubric to grade taking? This is coming. This is coming. We're not answering right now, but that's coming soon.
Yeah, it's coming up.
Challenge to focus on just a few areas. That's classroom. That's pretty good. You are on target here.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to move to the next.
And some points that are going to come up soon.
Let me see if I can do this right. All right.
So what we are going to do now is we are going to change gears a little bit, and we are going to focus briefly on feedback mode and the tools that we can use to provide the feedback. So feedback mode and tools refer to whether the feedback is provided in oral, written, visual, and here we are talking about images, icons, etc., or whether we are combining all these different modes, and also what tools we are using. Microsoft Word, track changes, we can be using a recording software, etc. Although research has examined feedback by mode, written, for example, written versus oral, and by means of the different technology, screencast video versus Microsoft Word, for example, we as instructors need to have a good grasp of the tool affordances when targeting different composition issues. As instructors, we need to plan how we are going to address the different linguistic and non-linguistic issues and consider the scaffolding potential of each tool. Now, it is worth clarifying that digitally mediated feedback is not by definition multimodal. On the contrary, we have many examples, and we are going to see some now, of peer automated and self-generated feedback that depend entirely on comments or guidance through words in isolation. So it's not that we are going to have visuals or something else all the time. Neither is richly multimodal feedback restricted to the digital form. Such an idea is immediately dispelled by watching how classroom teachers offer correctional advice or guidance through a varied assemblage of spoken language, silence, someone was saying before that silence is also language, gesture, eye contact, and more. Like we are always making gestures in the class to provide feedback. So let's have a look at different examples providing feedback with track changes, comments, and screencast-o-matic and Zoom. So in this first case, we are providing feedback using the track changes and also providing comments. In this case, is direct feedback. The instructor is telling the student what is wrong and has corrected it. In the next case, we are going to have the instructor providing comments, and is providing focus feedback. I'm sorry, indirect feedback. Is saying, for example, to say there is something wrong with the verb, but it's not saying exactly what. It's also saying, for example, AGR for agreement or things like that to indicate that there is something wrong, but it's not exactly what the correct answer is. The next example is coming from Screencast-O-Matic. In this case, the instructor was giving feedback to the student. Idoia, if you can start. And we are going to put the sound a little lower so I can keep on talking. But in this case, the instructor is giving feedback and is giving feedback on content, on grammar, accuracy, the syntax, the organization, the structure, everything. But as you can see, the instructor can highlight the sentence that she's discussing. And sometimes you see that circle is telling the student where they are focusing more, where the instructor is focusing more and what is happening there. And then another example that we are going to give is for infographics.
So in this example, we have an infographic. This is from Roman Zuniga study. And basically what you're looking at there is one of the first or second draft of the infographic. And in this case, the person is trying to talk about serious newspaper and less like kind of fake news. This is like the yellow newspaper type of thing. And in this case, what we're going to show you is how you can provide feedback via Zoom. So you are merging the oral, the visual, and the writing. And so let me give you an example. This is Spanish and English, but you can have a look at, you can hear the type of conversation that they are having.
During research en Elena, al lado de la prensa seria, casi pude encontrar en Canva fue el que dice bad and good. Todos los demás, I had to go elsewhere and look for images.
Y para los teléfonos, ¿los encontraste así con teléfonos or you created them?
No, el teléfono está en Canva. Pero en Canva te da la oportunidad de
And this is a Spanish heritage language learner.
Oh my
and so
God,
they're switching languages back and forth.
Show that to me.
Yes. It was just, that's what I'm telling you. I'm like, I went to sleep at 2 a.m. It took me hours just to make it look visually appealing.
As you can see, they struggle too, when they're creating this. But the important thing is that this instructor has been using Zoom in writing conferences as a tutor. And so they were able to talk about mostly the first draft is about the semiotic resources that were non-linguistic. And then afterwards, they will move into the linguistic ones. So there will be 2 sessions for this. And it was around 10-15 minutes each. So yes, time consuming, but then as you can see, the outcome was pretty impressive for someone who has never used infographics before.
And of course, today we cannot talk about second or heritage language writing and feedback if we don't talk about the big elephant in the room.
So this elephant is obviously artificial intelligence and whether it's a friend or an enemy. So let's have a look at that.
So what we're going to show you here are a few examples of how we can use in particular ChatGPT for feedback. So what we want to say is that if we use it appropriately, artificial intelligence, or in this case, ChatGPT, can be our friend in our class. So in this example, we are going to ask ChatGPT how to correct the sentence, I have been working in this assignment for a lengthy time. And ChatGPT is super excited about helping us and says, certainly the correct sentence is, I have been working on this assignment for a lengthy time. However, this is a very, very easy way to fix a problem without really learning. So we need to ask better questions when we want to get feedback. So we can go to ChatGPT and ask another question. Can you tell me why this sentence has grammatical errors? And then ChatGPT is going to be a little bit more detailed. And it's saying, yes, there are several grammatical errors. Let's break them down. And it's talking about the subject-verb agreement. It has to be, if it's I, the verb has to be have. If for the preposition is not in, it has to be on. You didn't spell lengthy correctly. And then it's giving us the correct sentence. We can also ask the ChatGPT how to change, if it can change the register and teach us how to make a sentence a little bit more sophisticated, which also help us with the vocabulary. So if we go to another click,
right.
can we ask, can you make this sentence more sophisticated? And ChatGPT says, certainly, again, we know it's very excited to help us. And says, I have been diligently engaged in this assignment for an extended period. And from there, we can also learn some of the vocabulary that would make the sentence more sophisticated. And next.
The other use is the genre feedback. So I'll show you an example. This is a text from, actually, it was a graduate student. And we were talking about genre, and so the question was, would you consider this text to be a good description? Because most of our students are international students, and they're getting used to the genre here in the US. So ChatGPT said that the description you provided has a few issues with clarity, grammar, and word choice, and it provides kind of how ChatGPT will see this as a better description. And it shows the key changes. So grammar clarity, subject-verb agreement, word choice, coherence. So it's kind of giving it some idea of what could improve as a genre. But we can also use this as, let me see, okay. We can also ask, can this text be changed into, and there's a typo there, into an argumentation. And again, like Anna was saying, very, very helpful, certainly. And it provides an argumentative format and tells you why the key changes. So we can look at this example as, as the enemy, they're doing the job for the student, or we can use those tools to ask the students to reflect on the different type of genres, because sometimes they are not aware of those differences so clearly. And so we can start using that and asking our students to use that to realize and reflect and bring back to the class what they have analyzed, instead of many times us giving them all the answers. So it's a different way of looking at the genres, but it can also work on our favor if we ask the right questions. So we now have an activity for all of you. Now you're going to be working, so hopefully you are ready for the activity. And I hope that you enjoy it.
Okay, so for this activity, and I'm going to ask you that you are with us until we finish the explanation. It has two parts. What we want everybody first is go to chatgpt.com. And then you are going to enter a prompt that is the prompt that appears under number 2 that starts with one of the interesting aspects of this reading, blah, blah, blah. Beatrice or Marisol or Kate, one of them is going to put this prompt in the chat. Idoia has done it, Kate has done it. So what we want you to do is get that prompt, get it into ChatGPT, and we want to ask ChatGPT to give you feedback. It can be feedback on grammar, it can be feedback on syntax, it can be feedback on multimodality, it can be feedback on genre, it can be feedback on anything that you like. Following an example of what we did before, we didn't do anything multimodal, we were just focusing on more the linguistic component. And once you do that, what we want you to do is share your experience of how it was to work on ChatGPT, and was it good, was it bad, and why was it good or bad. You don't need to use ChatGPT. There is not a need of use there is no need to have an account.
It's a matter
So
of
if you go-
playing with the prompt.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
would you like
If you use-
feedback about that?
Yeah. So you might have just type chatgpt.com, and it's true that you might have a screen that says something about logging. You can ignore it.
Maybe a hint could be something that you would like your students to do with that text, and ask them
We
to
have
start
already one
working on that.
answer.
All right.
Fast,
Fast.
organized, and easy to read.
Yeah, it's amazingly fast. Even you ask for to write an essay and it takes seconds. Effectively highlights this focus on the evolution of literacy education within the London group. You pointed out a significant aspect by noting the group effort. If someone wants to share what prompt they were using for the type of feedback, that would also be very interesting.
Oh, yeah.
If you want to copy the prompt that you used. Can you transform it into persuasive text? It's always the certainty. We're going to have to talk to ChatGPT to start changing those surprising answers. It was a much longer answer. Did anybody like to did anything with linguistic feedback? I haven't tried to.
To transform the text into a persuasive piece, you would need to emphasize a specific viewpoint or argument that supported with evidence or reasoning.
Mhm. One thing that Anna and I were also playing, we asked, what pictures would you use for this text? So it gives you other modes, or what music would you use with this text? So that can help you to create or start thinking about multimodal text. I hope
We
someone.
also have some prompts. Can you tell me what I need to correct in this text so that it's grammatically acceptable? Certainly,
Mhm.
he loves ChatGPT. ChatGPT loves, certainly.
Invites the students to make mistakes and use it to learn from those mistakes to correct grammar and other issues. I'm not sure if I understand that one.
Errors in clarity, grammar, and consistency. I think that's a prompt.
Mhm. And even if ChatGPT doesn't give you the right answer, the question is to come with those questions to class and do. One of the things that we did with ChatGPT in one of the classes was we gave the same prompt. I mean, they have the same text, the same prompt, and each of my students got different versions. So because we were trying to figure out if they would give us the same version, and it doesn't. So it was a nice conversation among my students to think about whether it was helpful, whether it wasn't. So having the conversation with our students was good for them. Invite students.
Can you make this passage more academic? All right, so we see the different types of prompts that you have used, and we also see some of the answers that ChatGPT has provided us.
And it's a good way to play, I think.
Yeah.
So, all right.
So let's move on.
So let's focus on the relationship between feedback and assessment. Because I think that, and this is something someone asked before about rubrics. So some people like to use feed forward instead of feedback because they prefer that the teacher's comments are timelier and they enable students to take corrective action to improve the quality of the assignment being submitted for a grade. So in a way, this feed forward, especially with technology, seems to be, it may be easier to provide in a way. And it kind of ties to assessment in different ways. In one sense, feedback should promote regular opportunities for encouragement and discussion around learning and assessment. And that's why we're going to show you the rubric. The emergent technologies support ongoing feedback and formative assessment. So it is fantastic when we are able to give them feedback at different times, especially with multimodal text, as mentioned before. Maybe first, the content, and then the linguistic once they have a more complete version of the text. And also feedback should match the goals and outcomes of the task. So one way of being able to work with this is by creating a rubric that you show and share the students. And so they know where you'll be targeting and they understand what they are expected to do. So their expectations match the instructor's expectation. And this is something that we created for a digital story. We published this in 2022. And we are not saying that you have to have all these categories, but we're giving you as many categories as possible. So one is audience, with this idea of engagement with the pace, how they tell the story, is it too fast, and so on. Semiotic resources, they're going to have oral narrations because they're narrating orally. They're integrating music and effects. We want to make sure that they help the story instead of overwhelming the narration because it's too loud. What images were we using? Literal, more metaphoric, whether the grammar is good or not, vocabulary. In the case of the poem, we might want to have a category for translingual practices, if that was working or not, or have a time for the students to reflect. Genre characteristics, this is a storytelling, so does it have the structure that we are discussing in class and we've been working on? Are the motions and transitions happening? We have another connectors in an essay, but what we notice in digital stories is that the connectors were substituted by music and images. What about the mechanics? Do they have the credits at the end? Authorship, especially if they're working collaboratively, how do we know that is a collaborative authorship? Do they have credits and citations at the end? Again, when we were talking about Iceland, the student, about choices of similar resources and what to express their identity, whether the story is being, produced well. If you're going to move and be more specific, issues of transduction and transformation, or an important one, did they complete the task according to the prompt that we gave them? So having a rubric will be extremely helpful when you're providing the feedback, and it will be helpful for the students to understand your expectations.
And as we are talking about feedback and feed forward, and we have this rubric that we are giving the students when they are beginning the task, the multimodal task, we can also work giving them some guidelines throughout the process, as we saw with the Roman Zuniga doing with the infograph. So related to audience, we can ask them, who is your audience? Are the semiotic resources that you are using are attracting the audience to be engaged with your text, with your multimodal text? If we are talking about genre characteristics and talking about the digital storytelling genre, are you using effectively all the different semiotic resources to create the story? If we are focusing on voice and identity, why have you chosen those images that you have used, for example, in the poem, the face, or in the blog, the image in Iceland? How are they representing your story and who you are, your identity? If we are looking at the semiotic resources, we can look at the oral resources, oral, visual, textual, language. For example, with the visuals, are you selecting the images that you are selecting? Are they correlated to the content that you are providing with the story? Are they literal or implicit images? Are they really working for the story that you want to tell? And the language, is the story too long or too short? Because sometimes the students talk and talk and talk, and you're like, you don't need that much to tell me the story. It can be shorter. What is the right amount of text that we need to tell the story that you want to tell us? And if we move on, the multimodal ensemble, as we said, with the transduction and transformation. For example, How are you playing with the size and the color of the images to express the intended meaning? Or how are you using these poses, the sound, and the special effects all together to convey the meaning of the story? So as our students are working on their digital stories, we can engage them in this series of questions to help them create that meaningful digital story. So, but now we have talked about what we have done up to now, but now what is next? We have seen what we could do, but we see that there are many questions ahead of us. The teacher's comments support the students in taking corrective action to improve the quality of an assignment that they are going to submit to be marked, commented on to be graded. Providing formative feedback or feed-forward, as we have seen, allows the students to focus on linguistic and non-linguistic issues throughout the development of the multimodal text. Due to increasingly digitally influenced learning environments and societies, it is essential to ponder when and how feedback in the field of second language and heritage language writing should pay greater attention. We should be paying greater attention to opportunities for multimodal representation in academic genres. We need to align the feedback to particular assessments and learning contexts, including the knowledge that the learner is attempting to convey. At the end of the day, and even though we are aware of the need to include multimodal composing in the classroom, we are also invested in our students' language development, as we said several times. Therefore, we need more research that is looking into whether the multimodal feedback that we are giving our students really has an effect in language development.
Mm-hmm. We're also more in need of studies that inform us about good instructors that we are, how feed-forwards help a student exploit semiotic modes to jointly advance their multimodal composing abilities. That means we are looking at the digital competence. And I think that one of the things that we need to start working on is more between what we said, the researchers and the teachers, to really figure out best ways of using all these type of feedback. Also, and finally, once again, the elephant in the room, the issue is not whether ChatGPT or any other artificial intelligence tool is a friend or an enemy, but the idea is how we can use them to support our feedback practices in the heritage and second language classroom. For example, if we complain, as we all have done in our lives as teachers, that providing feedback is too cumbersome or too time consuming, is there a way in which ChatGPT can help us create assignments in which learners can obtain feedback and reflect and therefore learn? So let's abuse what we already have and ask and teach our students how to use it ethically and at the same time use it as a tool to help them learn. And with that, we thank you. Any suggestion would be great. And I think we have a few minutes to ask more questions.
Yes, we do. We have a few questions. So I think that was a question that was asked a while back, is that it's about how students react to the introduction of these new genres in the classroom. Because while you mentioned at the beginning that there might be users and producers of multimodal text outside the classroom, that in the foreign language or the language classroom, there comes some expectation. And this person is saying in the question, do you find that there's differences from country to country in terms of abilities to demonstrate their potential? So this person is based in China and says that it took her over a year to get students out of, or to think about the language classroom differently, right? Than a place where you memorize vocabulary.
Yeah. But Beatrice, is this connected to ChatGPT or multimodal?
I think it's about multimodal text. So that was way before. So I think there are particular expectations I think that students have. That's what.
I agree. I think that sometimes the students think I'm coming here for a language class, you know, and why are we doing all of these other things? What I've noticed, for example, and I was teaching this course this last spring, and I have students writing in Spanish, and we created infographics. And so what I decided to do is to work about their fears. I mean, some of them were graduating from college at this time. And so we chose the topic of the jobs in the future and why your job is the right job to have. And so they created, it was kind of an argumentation, kind of essay, but in a synthesis in infographic. And they realized that it was important to be able to reflect about the jobs in the future, their own particular disciplines, and then to be able to reflect and show others what was the positive thing about what was happening in their professional lives. Once they saw it and they realized that then they can talk about that with others, that's when they decided they start seeing it in a different way. I think Anna and I will experience also with digital stories that they're like, why are we doing this? And when they see the final product, I'm not kidding, we have to take tissues to our classrooms because they're all weeping because there's been like this intense experience and they are sharing in all the students. So I think that it's true that you encounter students that are not going to be willing to do it. Others are naturals and they do it as, this is like doing on paper. Now I'm going to do it on Canva or whatever.
But I'm going to emphasize or echo that a comment that you made that some students don't want to create this type of multimodal text in the class. I have students telling me that they didn't think that there was any reason of including digital stories in the class. Like they were like, I didn't know what I was doing. And by the end of the class, they were so excited with the digital story that I had created. And they had put so much thought into it and so much work. There were students even working after the class was over because they really wanted to perfect it. So it is true that you are changing something in how they think that the language class should be like. But maybe now it's easier because they are seeing this type of multimodal text more frequently, at least in some places in the classroom.
I think so. Thank you. Somebody has a question about the rubric that you shared for the digital storytelling, the digital story. If I understand correctly, how do you help students understand what the descriptors mean in that rubric? Because some may be easier to understand than others.
Well, that goes a little bit like, sorry, Anna. You go ahead, Anna, if you want.
So what I have done when I was working on the digital story with the rubrics, we always started with models of how to create that, of digital stories that have been created. So when we were going through those models, we were talking about the different components. We were looking at the images, we were looking at the sound, we were looking at the story. And then we were analyzing each component and we were telling them, so this is what we would like to see in the future, or this is what you will want to do or you wouldn't want to do. And that's when you go also through the rubric, and that's how you explain how the rubric applies to the digital story and how it can apply to their own digital story. And that's the way they understand every single descriptor, at least in my class.
Yeah, even with infographics, I mean, sometimes we have students that are in the sciences, and in the infographics, one of the things that you can add is graphics. So if you had a bad infographic, people would say, oh, that is so wrong. You know, it's like that statistic is poorly done. And, you know, they all of a sudden they're talking about their area of expertise. And so being able to see the bad models help them understand the rubric a little bit more, and they become like critics. I mean, then they are like the hardest critics you can imagine because they have been analyzing someone else's that were poorly done.
Yeah. So there's some questions about the use of AI since you talked about this. So there's one question around, questions around authorship, plagiarism, ethics become important when using AI, and also publishing compositions out there on social media and public online spaces. Could you comment on that?
I can comment a little bit on the ethics. I have the conversation with my students because I was introduced in ChatGPT. I wanted to know what they were doing, and some of them are using it. And so I would get these essays that were completely correct. And I sat with them and I said, we have to have a meeting. And I mean, it was interesting because they were all, I was like, I'm not being judgmental. I'm not going to yell. I'm not going to do anything like that. I just want to understand. So they decided that they were going to write their first one on their own. And then when I provided the feedback, they were going to use ChatGPT or translators to understand what they have done wrong. And the second thing I asked them, that every time they use something like that, just to cite it, the same way we cite someone that has said something in the past, I will always say, if you have used ChatGPT, you have to let me know. So it was kind of interesting to see that at the end, my students will say, this was corrected by ChatGPT, but they have noticed that what they could do on their own, what the ChatGPT could give them as feedback, and at the same time, we're asking them to be clear about their ethical ways of using it. So you could have, you can still do paper in the class and they cannot use anything, but these tools are out there. So we want them to use them as ethically as possible. That's about ethics. Anna.
I don't have anything else to say.
I think there's questions about ethics, but that was something else. I can't remember.
Yeah, I already punched answer a lot. I think it was about authorship, how do you address that? Publications of these texts also, and sharing them on social media. So I think it kind of all ties to the notion of ethics, right? And realizing that you need to cite or,
And there are also these sites that you can make them private just for the classroom, because you can do like a YouTube, you can create your own world, so you don't have to share it with the rest. The same with Instagram, you can kind of create private accounts that can be used just in the classroom. So that's another way of, because some of the students don't not want to share with the rest of the world. They're private, they don't want to do that. So you have to find ways of making privacy an issue. And so that's why we need to learn. I'm learning as I go. And sometimes my students are helping me how to do the Instagram just for the class. So
another question here is still related to AI and ChatGPT in particular. Somebody is asking, how do you address the errors that might actually be generated by the tool?
I think you can address them in the same way that you address the feedback that sometimes, the peer feedback that sometimes we provide each other. Sometimes it's not always correct. It's a time to bring it back to the classroom and say, well, what is happening here, how it can be done differently. It's the same idea of making it a classroom activity of, this is what ChatGPT has given us. It's not the correct agreement. It's not the correct. Someone was mentioning before that ChatGPT was not good for German. I think I read that in one of the comments. So, and I think that also happened back in the day with Google Translate. When students were using Google Translate, they were having all these very creative translations that didn't make any sense, but they were very creative. But what do you learn from those exercises? And what is it telling us about the language, and what do you want to learn from that mistake, and how can you make it correctly?
For sure, AI generates so many questions, but someone this person is saying, I noticed that my students are using AI or other tools to interpret authentic materials in order to develop their interpretive reading skills. And that person says, I want to discourage them from relying too heavily on these tools. However, considering that students will eventually enter the real world, the ability to use AI and digital tools might become a necessary skill. How would you define these tools as essential real world skills? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I always say that sorry, Anna.
No, go ahead.
No, I always say that we are always afraid of what's coming next and we don't understand yet. We've talked about, in mathematics, we used to do our own, and then they brought the calculator, and, hell broke loose and everything was terrible, and now everybody's using that tool. Our idea, and we've talked about this, is that if it's out there, we want to learn how to use it for our advantage. And so I think that they're going to be using. I see people that are not in languages using it just to ask other things. So it's out there. So the question is, how can we create our activities, our task in a way that they cannot easily use the artificial intelligence, but if they have to, they know how to use it ethically. Anna?
I'm also going to say that I'm going to the example of the calculator. I can have a very sophisticated calculator that I actually have one from the time I used to do statistics in graduate school. I only know how to use 1/3 of all the functions that calculator has. So I still need to have the knowledge in order to be able to use the tool. And what we are doing here is the tool is there and students are going to use it. Let's give them the knowledge, and we are learning with them. It's not that we are giving them the knowledge, we are learning with them because they are teaching us.
Mm-hmm.
But let's work together to make it a meaningful use. Because if you don't know how to use a tool, you are not going to take advantage of it, and you're not going to get everything that you can get from the tool.
Mm-hmm. And they are critical thinkers. I mean, like I said, when we use the same text and the same prompt, and they got different stories, we're talking about stories. And they were different. They were discussing, oh my goodness, that vocabulary was not in ours. What does that mean? And all of a sudden it was like, one of these, they said, we have to add a dialogue between dogs that was going to be funny. And they were like, this is not funny. And so they are criticizing the tool as well. And so they see the limitation. So working with them, it's better that if they do it on their own, because they are not using the same parameters that we are trying to show them. I'm not saying that we are so great, but I think that having these conversations with them have been more helpful maybe for me, because I kind of rearranged the activities and the writing tasks differently now.
So we're going to take one last question. It's related to an example that you had in your presentation. It's the bilingual poem. And that person is, I see that the feedback for that poem is asking for reflection. And this person question is, how well do students understand this feedback? What they are asking to do in terms of revision? Have you been able to examine that?
We've used that in Spanish heritage language courses, because the needs of those students, especially in Texas, are very different to students of second language. And one of the things that we deal is trying to make them feel proud of being Hispanics in Texas, where they have heard all their lives that their Spanish is terrible. And so the classes talk about identity a lot. So it was easier in that kind of classroom. Whereas maybe in a foreign language classroom, you might touch that topic. But in this specific case, it was easier to do it because they are talking about identity. They are talking about awareness, who they are, how they see their community in Texas, in the US. So the topic was more related to that kind of topic. So that's why it was easier for them because they were already reflecting and they're trying to figure it out who they are, which is a very difficult. I'm sure you feel the same way in Arizona when you have heritage language students. And it can be any language. It can be Korean, it can be Russian, but these are the issues that they're having when being in the US.
All right, so I think, we're going to have to stop it here. We're already 5 minutes past the bottom of the hour. I want to thank you both for a really outstanding webinar. You can see in the chat the comments and the congratulations that are coming to you.
Thank you.
It's been really a really great conversation, and it's touched on so many different issues that I think really were fruitful for thinking ahead. So thank you again to you both. I know it's probably getting a little late on your side of the globe, but thank you again, and it's been really a pleasure for us to have you both this morning.
Oh,
thank you for inviting us.
Yeah. And thank you for all the great questions.
Yes, and comments. You see, we're going to learn from you.
Yeah.
I think there was a real appreciation also of people, a couple comments about you encouraging, not dismissing or prohibiting the use of AI and using it in productive ways with students. That I think also was something that resonated with a lot of the participants too.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're glad that we were able to do that.
So we're going to keep the webinar open so that participants can comment, but also have time to access the link to the survey.
Okay.
But if you
All
if you have other plans after this webinar, you feel free to leave us. And Kate will be in touch with you. You'll get a copy of the chat and the questions.
Okay.
All right.
Well, thank you so
Thank you.
much. And one more
you.
thing, if anybody wants to contact, we left the email for Anna and I in case we didn't see all the comments. So thank you so
right.
much.
Wonderful. Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.
Bye.